Hello, you're watching our series on the Open RAN Vanguard inside the Telus Open RAN transformation. I'm Guy Daniels, and this is the final programme of the series where we have shared an exclusive inside view of the Open RAN transformation at Telus. All of our previous interviews, deep dives and panel discussions are available to watch via our website. There is a wealth of information in those programmes. They really are essential viewing. And we also have an exclusive report from Appledore Research, and more on that later. As one of the industry's first major telcos to deploy Open RAN throughout its network, Telus has given us an incredibly valuable perspective on Open RAN's capabilities and its ongoing potential. So let's now bring together all of our findings and discover how the industry can continue and expand the Open RAN journey. And joining me on this final Vanguard programme are Bernard Bureau, who is Vice President Wireless Strategy and Services at Telus, Paul Miller, Chief Technology Officer for Wind River, Daniel Lynch, Senior Marketing Director with Intel, and Robert Curran, Consulting Analyst for Appledore Research. Hello everyone, good to see you all. Thanks so much for taking part in this programme. Now, during the show, we're going to play some brief clips from the previous programmes in this series. And let's first of all hear from Nazim Ben-Hadid of Telus.
We are a big company in Canada, but a small company when you compare us to, American or European or Asian peers. And we compensate for that through innovation and risk-taking. But we take a structured approach to risk. So as we were rolling this out, we had a very structured process with gating and, clear deliverables for each one of the gates as we brought this service into production. You probably heard from, me or from my team saying that we find that the performance KPIs today with ORAN are better or on par or better than traditional RAN. We really advocate for the technology. We share each and every one of our learnings, with our industry peers as much as we can. And we believe that as an industry, we have to be more opinionated in terms of having consistent and open standards through the ORAN Alliance or others, 3GPP and so on and so forth.
Bernard, you and your colleagues have been very open in sharing your experiences with the industry. What's the reaction of other telcos when they see what you've already achieved?
Well, I think a lot of operators are pleasantly surprised that one of their peers the size of Telus is this far into Open RAN. Everyone is for openness and standardized interfaces in wireless networks, of course. But ultimately, total cost of ownership and network performance needs to be on par or better than traditional RAN for people to really jump into this. In our case, we've achieved our targets for both. And now we turn our focus on improving on automation, implementing the non-real-time rake, and other significant advantages of open and virtual RAN. I think all operators are slowly but surely moving from their initial point of view, which was, why would I do ORAN? Now to, why not do ORAN given its maturity level? So this is pretty much what I'm seeing.
Great, thanks very much, Bernard. And Paul, you speak to a lot of operators as well. What is it that you're hearing from them when they see for themselves what Telus has achieved?
Well, Telus, as I've spoken about, is obviously an industry leader in adopting new technology, and Open RAN is certainly representative of that. We've been really excited to see the transformation that happened in 2024. As you mentioned, we speak to many operators globally and get a lot of feedback with respect to their willingness to adopt Open RAN. And in past years, back in 2022 and 2023, there was a lot of fear with respect to the adoption complexity. Am I going to become a system integrator myself? I've got multiple vendors coming into my network. Since then, this has really been proven to be completely solved, right? High levels of automation within the Open RAN stack have really helped a lot. the vendors outside of the service providers performing the integration that they need to in order to make this system work correctly have really resulted in superior performance to traditional RAN, as many of the technology providers now shift all of their investments towards Open RAN. We're really seeing an acceleration of the feasibility of that technology stack.
Good to hear, Paul. Thanks very much. And Daniel, this series has been all about sharing experiences and being open about it. What's the feedback you're getting? What are you hearing from other telcos?
Thanks, Guy. I think just to add to the guys there, I think the major thing that Telus brings to the table and really cuts through is the size. I think we've seen brownfields, we've seen good KPIs, we've seen those kind of problems solved in the past, but it's really the scale. You don't have to be the biggest operator on planet Earth to be able to realize this and rally the troops and figure out the system integration plan. It's actually possible for everybody. And that's the big message that I think Telus brings to all our conversations I'm having across the globe.
Great. Thanks very much, Daniel. Thanks, everyone. Well, the Telus project seems to be a transition to both Open RAN as a procurement strategy and also virtualized or cloudified RAN as a technology strategy. This is really important. Other operators seem to be proceeding with one or the other, but not necessarily both. So I'd like to ask you now, given our collective experiences to date, do we believe that making a single journey to both open and virtualized RAN is indeed the best approach? I'm going to ask you all, but Daniel, I'll come straight back to you first if I can.
Yeah, I think there's no question about it that an open and a software-based implementation is absolutely critical. Whether you end up with multiple parties or a single party, you still have that option, the business option, the technology option, the upgradability, but also, things aren't working out, or if you've some sort of gaps in your network, and you can make those decisions a couple of years time. If it's just Open RAN, if it's not software based, you really are locked in. So you're moving from a lock-in solution to a lock-in solution which has a defined API that you can't really do anything with. So I think it's super important that the operator community embrace both openness and also software-based RAN, whether it be cloud or vRAN. That's up for the vendors to deploy, but it's software centric, and then that allows every element of the supply chain, whether it be myself at the silicon level, the CAS, the RAN, the server, the radio, everybody then is at play. Everybody's kept honest. Everybody's really hunting and delivering their best quality business into the operator at that given time, and know that we have to have a phenomenal roadmap. If we don't, then we're just swapped out within 6 months.
Yes, that's a real fear. Thanks very much, Daniel. Very clear. Thank you. And Paul, are you seeing that the single journey approach here has been the optimal strategy?
Well, we're really seeing, kind of what was just spoken about, right? I think initially when Open RAN was looking to be adopted, people were very concerned about TCO, and that's a rather one-dimensional way of looking at the problem with respect to being a barrier of adoption. And now that we've kind of passed that particular problem, people now see the greater commercial advantages of Open RAN. As we just talked about, there's competition for the life of the network. If you're 3-4 years into deployment and you're any component within that solution stack, be it hardware, the virtualization layer, the applications, it's frankly very easy to be swapped out. And that causes the vendors to be competitive for the life of the network. And that has a business benefit to the service provider that the pure TCO analysis doesn't see. But over the life of the network is going to drop the cost of operation down significantly. Competition never goes away. And this is very different than traditional RAN, where that competition happened at the onset of the network design and win, but then kind of abated as you went forward in time. And then, of course, the technology piece that you just mentioned, a lot of service providers are starting to look forward to incremental revenue streams that can be provided by 5G. And 5G monetization has been difficult in this industry. But we see with virtualization at the edge of the network, of course, adopting open and virtual RAN enables you to have a fully virtual network, software defined, all the way to the edge. And this allows you to launch new services like connected vehicle or private 5G. And these create ways of monetizing your network much more rapidly than if you had a bespoke hardware appliance out there. So I think there's long-term commercial benefits and pure 5G commercial benefits that people are starting to finally realize Open RAN opens up for everyone.
Yeah, thanks very much, Paul. And Bernard, you've been doing this. You obviously believe in this approach. You know, has this, in hindsight, been the right approach for you? Is this something you would advocate as well to other operators?
Absolutely. And my answer is going to be not so different from my two colleagues who just spoke, but I'm going to add a little bit onto it. It all comes down to be able to exercise choices when granting business to RAN equipment suppliers. And we strongly believe that a supplier decision needs to be based on merit and not on incumbency. And to decouple the incumbency from the equation, you need both. You need ORAN interfaces, both technically and contractually. That's very important. It needs to be supported by your supplier. And number two, you need virtual RAN with no proprietary hardware used for 4G and 5G. Again, this is a nuance of what we think is super important. But this way, it's the only way that you can really decouple the incumbency from the decisions. I think having Open RAN for open frontal or for SMO interfaces on paper only is also problematic. Unless a telco implements a multi-vendor environment, it's very difficult to build that knowledge and go through that learning curve. It's a journey that can only be meaningfully taken by doing it.
Indeed, and thank you, Bernard. Very, very clear. Some interesting points you raised there. And Robert, I'm going to come to you to pick up on some of these because, Bernard was talking about some of the nuances, but these are really, really important nuances. And we've also heard about monetization issues, TCO, choices. There's a lot to digest here. So what are your views on this single approach strategy?
Yeah, no, I think there are some good keywords in what the other panelists here have already mentioned. Paul talked about the danger of focusing on TCO as a one-dimensional approach, and I think that kind of opens up the issue here. Is that open and disaggregated and cloudified really have become fused ever since 2018. The ORAN Alliance kind of formed by fusing together two parallel streams that on their own are interesting, but put them together and you get something very, very powerful. So I think that's already been happening. It is essentially one single journey, and the benefits are on offer when you pursue it as both. I think something you talked about nuance a moment ago. I think there's a nuance here in that the decision about Cloud RAN is something that vendors can take on their own, whether they are providing a whole stack or whether just playing part in it. The decision about open is a decision that really operators have to take. So again, you're seeing an interesting development here in that there is kind of common purpose and shared aims here, operators and vendors working in partnership around a fused goal of cloudified, open, disaggregated RAN. That really, I think, is where the power is coming in, and that's where it's not really an either or. If you're only doing one, you're not getting the benefits. I think there's another interesting aspect of this, which is the idea that it's possible that Cloud RAN might give smaller, faster benefits, but Open RAN gives longer and larger benefits. So it's an interesting thing to look at some of the points at which they overlap. So that's another thing that again we're keeping an eye on in the market. That makes the appeal of some of these things seem to be different, but put them together and you get something very powerful.
Yeah, thanks very much, Robert. Well, Telus is clearly committed to Open RAN at a time when other operators might be thinking that Open RAN is something they should leave until some future 6G refresh program. So based on the progress and experience we've seen with Telus, what reasons would you give for operators to prioritize the adoption of Open RAN sooner rather than later? And Paul, let's come across and hear what you think first.
Yeah, it's certainly a really interesting question and one that a lot of service providers grapple with. Obviously, we've had this kind of evolution going on from 4G in the past, when LTE, where you had a completely bespoke appliance-based network. Now, as you move towards 5G, you have this battleground going on between a virtualized and open approach and the legacy approach. And obviously, those incumbent vendors are kind of reticent to let go of that approach. It's been a cash cow for them for literally decades. Now, as we look to 6G, we see there's no argument, right? That'll be fully open and fully cloud-based as a technology stack. And so really the challenge for a service provider is if you're moving to that type of architecture, How do you develop the expertise within your business in order to deploy and operate such a system? We're talking about systems based on cloud technology, Kubernetes, software-defined networking, containers and pods. And these are foreign concepts to a lot of service providers that are struggling to adopt this new technology. There's no better time to get familiar with that than the present, right? Before you get to 6G and you're kind of mandated to move there, as you're deploying 5G today, adopt some Open RAN, right? And we certainly see some service providers doing that exclusively and some doing that partially. But that allows them to build the expertise within their teams to become familiar with, deploy, and operate and debug that type of technology. Really important skill factor. The other is, obviously, as we've been talking about and Bernard has spoken about, TCO and KPIs and performance are now actually superior with Open RAN. And you're starting to see a shift in investment in the RAN providers and the technology providers into Open RAN as the primary vehicle for their R&D dollars. Therefore, that's going to continue and accelerate. So if you really want to have a high-performant, low-cost 5G network, the actual best solution today is Open RAN.
Thank you, Paul. Daniel, there's some compelling arguments there we've heard from Paul. What are your thoughts? Why should those operators who have yet to decide, why should they make that adoption of Open RAN sooner rather than later?
Yeah, it's a tough one because we could be here accused of lecturing or giving out to the whole market about what's wrong, move on. But that's the market. This is by its nature for the last number of decades a very conservative, slow-moving market. So we have to respect that, and that's what we've been doing at Intel is really taking that really long perspective and say, hey, this is a market well worth it, because when it does flip and you have operators like Telus deploying the solution, they're going to get a huge amount of value out of that, and for us, that means there's more value in terms of silicon sale. It's just going to take time. It's ready now. It's mature now. The ecosystem is there. The kinks in terms of the form factor fit at the box level, the DU server level, the ability to do, is it just greenfield versus brownfield, the reliability, the KPIs, the options, the roadmap, the TCO, like our own new product, our Xeon 6 SoC has a phenomenal leap forward in TCO, really reducing the amount of equipment you need on site while delivering your 2x capacity gen on gen. And within that, then we're turning on AI for free, right? This kind of the term that I've been using at MWC recently was just zero cost AI. As you roll out new services, there shouldn't be a premium at the silicon and software level for those capabilities. So it's just, Guy, I think it's just a case of time. This is the industry, 2-3 years, whatever long it takes, it's going to be worth it for those operators as they make that transition. Interesting sidebar conversations that you're having at MWC. I had one really good one where a virtual RAN supplier was talking about deploying in a North American market, and where the operator had their legacy equipment, traditional RAN, and their vRAN equipment at the same cell tower and doing drive-by tests. And that really kind of reinforced to the traditional RAN provider going, oh, okay, yeah, I can see, so that the operator would publish the result to both RAN suppliers and, well, this is where you're at. And sometimes vRAN wins, sometimes traditional RAN wins. But it's up and down, and all of a sudden the traditional RAN guys are going, ooh, okay, yeah, this KPIs are really strong. We better do something about this, and that'll just feed its way into the rest of the market and that's what we're seeing really. A lot of excitement out of MWC, a lot of clarity. Okay, this is our silicon roadmap is good. The whole supply chain is very solid, and then you get the message. Tell us, hey, yeah, it's ready. Let's go. So it's going to take time, but it is happening.
Good positive message. Thank you, Daniel. Just going to take time. And as Paul said earlier, we know the direction of 6G. Well, we don't, but we can estimate it, and it's highly likely that will be 6G. So it's all pointing in that direction. Terrific. Unless we've got any more comments for this question, we'll move on. And I think it's time for another clip from our Vanguard series. It's been a great series, this. So let's now hear from Prashant Agarwal of Intel.
The disaggregated multi-vendor nature of Open RAN means that operators have to invest a little more integration effort than they would with a traditional single vendor RAN solution. But saying that, the vendor ecosystem has done a lot of pre-integration work that greatly simplifies and speeds up the deployment process. For example, the Intel solution building ecosystem, it contains of hundreds of vendors with whom we work to develop fully integrated vRAN solution, which could speed up the deployment process significantly. So the goal is to create lots of different recipes that are pre-integrated, tested, and optimized to work seamlessly together. This way, operators can look at different recipe options and choose the ones they work best for them.
Now, there is some concern in the industry about so-called single vendor Open RAN. Are these concerns actually valid, or is this a pragmatic and perhaps necessary step in the evolution of the industry? Robert, let's come across to you first, because I'm interested to hear what you have to say on this.
Yeah, I think it's a natural reaction to some of the things that Daniel was talking about there, in terms of the industry being very used to how it works today over decades and kind of established practices. The concern is that there's going to be what I call ORINO, which is Open RAN in name only, and operators won't get the benefits of disaggregation, won't get the benefits in terms of something that Bernard mentioned a moment ago, choice and flexibility and opportunity to innovate. It's a reasonable concern. No one wants to be locked in again to a very particular stack or solution or vendor specifically. I think at the end of the day, it will come back to that very fundamental question: what's best for customers? And that I think is what will define what operators choose to do and what's right for the industry. It's clear that there's still some movement towards single vendor Open RAN solutions. But even there, I think the power of disaggregation and the power of the forces that work in the industry today, technology forces, are starting to break that apart in any case. When you look at how the major vendors have changed and evolved their positions, from being kind of appliance-based, the trajectory is fairly clear. It is becoming more open. So I think that there's a natural stepping stone, if you like, which is the sort of single vendor Open RAN as a market offer. But I think even there, the direction of travel is clear. We're headed towards open, disaggregated, and particularly pre-integrated solutions using combinations of ecosystem partners, because that's what works. It works for Telus, it works with other companies, and it's where you get the best benefit of both open and cloudified virtualized networks.
Thanks very much, Robert. And Bernard, let me come to you. Is this issue of so-called single vendor Open RAN, is it a concern? Is it even an issue? Is it a worry for other operators?
I think it should be. I'm coming back again to the ability to exercise supplier choices. And if somebody is opting for a single Open RAN, you still need to build the ORAN know-how. And you need to have the right commercial language to be able to exercise these choices without having to revert back to an equipment swap. You need to be able to test the ORAN interfaces. And yes, you can do part of it with a CUDU emulator, for example, but that's not going to take you very far. I really think that a better approach is to balance a multi-vendor environment in ORAN while mitigating the risk. You don't need to have a ton of different suppliers. You can only pick, one aspect of multi-vendor and, focus on that. And the learnings are going to be incredible coming from just picking one of your radios being a third-party vendor. It's very, very difficult to do it without actually, it's difficult to be prepared for it without actually doing it.
Thanks, Bernard. And you mentioned this before. You've got to be in it to understand it and see it and get the benefits from it. Paul, let me come across to you. And what do you think about this issue?
Yeah, I think that we're seeing globally, and we've been deploying virtual RAN and then Open RAN for over 5 years. There's actually only one service provider that we're aware of that went with a single vendor solution, and that has really crippled their ability to have choice, as Bernard expressed. And really the reason behind that is all the service providers understand as they move into Open RAN, that very concept of openness gives them choice, it gives them commercial power and flexibility. And to sacrifice that is really not a wise choice. And obviously the counterpoint to this that a lot of people struggle with early on, especially you go back 2 or 3 years, these multiple vendors create a complexity for you to deal with, right? If you went with a single vendor solution that's fully integrated, That's the legacy approach of building networks. And you get that single throat to choke. You get that single integrated technology stack. That's been a pleasant experience generally. Now, as you move towards a multi-vendor disaggregated solution like Open RAN, there's a complexity, right? You're bringing multiple vendors and you've got integration happening in your network. And as I said, going back a couple of years, that was pretty painful. But as we sit here today in 2025, all these vendors are now integrating in their own labs. We have partnerships established with all of them. These are proven solutions that are in deployment at high scale. That risk is really reduced. So a lot of the new adoption of Open RAN 2024 and 2025 is driven by the proof that it's now mature and the fact that you can execute that at scale and benefit from these commercial advantages of this approach. Therefore, don't go single vendor, right? And a lot of the service providers globally understand this.
Thanks very much, Paul. So perhaps a necessary evolution then. Daniel, let's come across to you. What do you think?
Yeah, listen, I think the team did a really, really good job there at articulating the value of ORAN. Is that, Robert, not sure, you trademarking that one? That's a good one. But how would you know? How would you know it's ORAN compliant, number one? Because, you know, it's all self-contained. The APIs, the connectivity, the work that's done from the RU down to DU and DU through the stack. How do you know? And I think it's ORAN compliant. So as the operator makes that maybe tough decision in 3-4 years' time to exit from that supply chain, all of a sudden, all the complexity that was hidden becomes exposed and was a massive, massive business cost for the operator to do a swap out. The other thing we hear a lot about is, well, we've got a traditional RAN path and we've got open software-based RAN. We can't manage both. And I think that argument is starting to lose. There's a lot of work. Prashant in that video mentioned the work that we're doing in the FlexRAN community, but there's a whole heap of other stuff we're doing. We're actually we're involved in changing the C++ language, right? And by doing that, we started with, it's called standard SIMD, stud SIMD. And that library, what that does, it dramatically reduces your baseband source code, right? Like you're talking, we've seen in tests where it's 85% reduction in number of lines of code, KLOC. And that's a massive, massive saving for all the supply chains. So do you know what? When we go software-based, the R&D complexity isn't as big as we originally seen. And that's what we see with the early Open RAN software-based RAN providers. It's actually, it's a lot easier. And now we can just fine-tune and deliver the really, really good KPIs and now pivot from that into that business innovation, which is super, super important as we deploy 5G standalone, and, you know, services on top of that 5G standalone network. So yeah, I think the risks are you know, staleness in terms of innovation in the short term, business risk as you make those hard transition changes in the long term, and then the actual argument of the R&D complexity. I think that's really starting to fade away because of the reality of how we've been working with the community to enable and reduce the cost of that.
Yeah, absolutely, Daniel. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for those comments. Well, we've time to watch another clip from our Vanguard series. So let's now hear from Randy Cox of Wind River.
I believe that ORAN is certainly a viable technology today. I believe it is the future of cellular networks moving forward. When we think of 6G, I think that's a foregone conclusion that there will be virtualized networks in an open environment. I think as I look at this and you think about ORAN and the promises of ORAN in terms of vendor choice and the flexibility of choosing the best in class, the innovation aspects and the drive for innovation, and lastly, challenging the legacy costs. I think all three of those pillars of ORAN and the promise of ORAN are coming to fruition.
Well, let's look at another aspect of Open RAN now. And Bernard, let me address this to you first. How has your adoption of Open RAN changed the planning and the expected phasing of your year-on-year network investments? Do your forward spending plans now reflect maybe smaller, more frequent investments in upgrading the network? And are you forecasting an overall downward trend perhaps on OPEX for the RAN?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we've been quite public on this. We've got a big project right now, which is to replace our previous incumbent suppliers' equipment. So that's, capturing a great deal of capital for us. And it's really certainly a great pivot point for us to move to O-RAN and vRAN. By the end of 2027, we're going to complete that swap, and we are going to be 50% O-RAN and vRAN. When that project ends, then we're coming into more, regular years in terms of capital spend. I would say that what's really changed with O-RAN and vRAN in terms of capital expenditure is that we have the ability now to look at a bunch of different options in the future. We love our suppliers. We have no problem with our current suppliers, but having the ability to explore, what's best of breed, making sure that, our current suppliers are able to provide us with the best possible technology. That's really an important, meaningful change. Telus has always had the approach of investing more regularly year over year rather than having a big project for 2 years where you deploy 100% of your network with 5G, like in certain countries, and then after that you go through years of very minimal investment. So we're not like that. We have always traditionally spent our capital pretty evenly over the years, and we O-RAN and vRAN is going to help us continue making the best technology choices on an ongoing basis with more options. You also mentioned, the operational expenditures. I think everybody's heard about that. Our efficiency is greatly improved year over year, and we expect a lot more from O-RAN and vRAN due to the improved automation capabilities, closed loop optimization, and electricity consumption, and so on and so forth. I think the way that I'm seeing this is that the best outcome operationally for Telus is to be able to extract more out of our assets to maximize the customer experience on our network and minimize any pain that our customers may have. We have planned for using advanced data techniques for anomaly detection, closed loop actions, and some of these things are already in place. But we're also looking at different configuration implemented several times per day in the context as the context changes throughout traffic usage and stuff like that. This is very exciting. So instead of saying we're going to be able to lower capital expenditure, I like to think that we're and see things differently and say we're going to be able to do more with the existing money that we can spend on our network for the great benefit of our customers.
Great. Thanks, Bernard. Great insights there. I'm going to come across to all of our guests now, but Robert, I'm going to start with you next. What changes are you seeing perhaps in spending patterns and trends or might you expect to see moving forward?
Yeah, I think one of the key success criteria for the Open RAN movement in general has been the opportunity for alternative vendors to participate in the value chain. And that, I think there's some evidence that is clearly beginning to happen. I think it's not happened as fast or as radically, perhaps, as some of the early expectations were, but I think they were a little overexcited. I think the reality is that the industry, and certainly the pioneers like Telus and Wind River and Intel on this call, have been learning extremely fast, and that whole cycle of innovation and folding the learnings back into product is accelerating, and that's what makes things interesting. And we didn't even get on to talking about some of the more advanced kind of AI applications, which again is a whole field of vendors now beginning to play in that space. What you can do with the data that Open RAN networks expose. So I think we will see more of that for sure. And that's a healthy thing, and that's part of what the whole ecosystem is about: fostering innovation, rewarding it, getting results, doing as Bernard says, customers seeing the effect, and then repeating that loop, more quickly, and looking at more ways to constantly improve. So we are seeing, I think, evidence that is happening, and not everyone will win, but there will be new companies emerging from there who develop specialisms, and develop a clear position in the marketplace that ranks them as an expert in their field. It's just there are a lot more fields to play in with Open RAN.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Robert. And Daniel, let's come across to you next. What are you seeing in terms of changing patterns and the way that your customers make their investments and swap out and evolve their systems?
Just go back to Bernard's point, and something that when I work with my engineering team, they always accuse me of just hearing the positive. So I think I heard from Bernard that he's just doubling his spend every year on year, and it's going to go at the exponential spend of his equipment. So that's the bit I took away from what Bernard said anyway. But seriously, everybody's really learning as this evolves. I mean, if you think back in the 2018-19 timeframe where we had a server with an FPGA, and then we got a lot of feedback going, hey, do you know what, that FPGA, we don't like how you manage that. It's very complex in the server. And then we moved that into a dedicated ASIC technology and then we eventually evolved that sucked that into the CPU through an ORAN compliant interface. And then we got a lot of feedback through the generation. Well, hey, do you know, I see this is the trajectory of data. This is where we see your CPUs. You need to do something with your instructions. And we introduced this thing called 5GI. So we change x86 instructions to optimize implementation of a 5G, and it was initially for baseband, but actually hit the scheduler. And also we got a lot of goodness and boosts out of LTE as well. And then we're with Grand Rapids D, where a lot of feedback going, okay, we've got some configurations where you need 2, sometimes 3 servers at the site. And from a TCO point of view, that's not quite right. You guys need to do kind of step change. And that's where we brought in Xeon 6 SoC, put up to your 72 cores, and it really allows everything consolidated. Vast majority of configurations are now onto one server. So there's a lot of hardware learnings that we've had over the last number of generations. I think to Robert's point now, we are transitioning into more software lessons. The AI is a great example. So we spent a lot of time in the last 12 months reanalyzing what's the industry saying about AI, what do they need, what's the real usage, what's the real size of the models, what's the latency targets, and that's why with our Xeon 6 SoC, we've turned on our AI engine, AMX, and with that, you're shifting. It gives the operator the choice to keep with a traditional implementation, in software-based traditional implementation, into a AI/ML implementation, and for zero cost, right? Because the actual size of the models are quite small. It's more about smaller number of parameters, and it's more about latency. So the cost of it is actually pretty much in par with the existing traditional implementations. So that's the focus right now for us, is really understanding the actual benefit out of AI in the RAN. How can we quickly get it out into the market? We're going through another 3 to 5 years of study, and okay, yeah, maybe there is a bit of a benefit. And by the time you actually you've made that decision, the traditional implementations have caught up anyway, and then it just moves on, delays, how to get it out to the market as soon as possible. So that's going to be I think the industry's big learning, as the silicon has really got super highly performant, highly cost optimized. Now it's all about the pace of software innovation, for example, AI.
Daniel, we all dream of exponential spend. We can keep on dreaming, unfortunately, can't we? Paul, let me come across to you, and we're talking about this issue of what changes you might be seeing in operator spending in regards to Open RAN, or the cadence of new network upgrades. What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's funny hearing exponential spend and Rhino. We've got some fun conversations happening here today. Yeah, I think going back to your original question, looking at the cost profile over time of adopting this technology, and Bernard starting to see within his business the eventual reduction of that, it's really driven by 2 factors. And I think we need to keep an eye on why is this happening? Why is ORAN producing benefit? One is on the CapEx and InPEX side, the cost of adoption of the technology. Certainly with processor technology like Sapphire Rapids and now Granite Rapids D or Xeon 6, we're starting to see a massive reduction in the amount of compute nodes required to implement the far edge of the network. And typically on the far edge, as a large-scale service provider, you'll have thousands to tens of thousands of nodes out there. So if you have an impact like that from the processor architecture and technology and the hardware layer, it's going to have a massive impact on the initial investments required to build the network. And then, of course, the software architecture, in particular of the infrastructure layer, allowing you to reduce the nodes by as much as a third based on your high availability and redundancy architectures and how you implement the compute platform. That's very important as well. That's something that we've focused on in our business. But the long-term cost, the OpEx piece to run the network every single year, that's become the recent focus, at least for us in the past couple of years, as we have several customers that have gotten to very high-scale deployment of virtual and Open RAN. You start to see patterns emerging. You start to see difficulties of running at that level of scale. And we found that two components are really necessary to drive the OpEx down. One is on analytics and machine learning, the ability to perform predictive outage avoidance and predictive analytics, give you a single pane of glass to look into that infrastructure and the applications that are running, incredibly important. And then also automation, right? And this brings in the topic of AI. But automation, both closed loop and open loop, where you can react to those analytics events and then take corrective actions in your network. Do you have that single pane of glass? Can you deploy and operate the infrastructure as well as you can the applications on that infrastructure? And can you do that from a convergent environment and really reduce the cost to operate your network? And then, of course, in 2025, looking at AI from an operations perspective, we've done demos with TelecomTV where you can see just asking the network natural language questions, getting the responses back. This is turning days or weeks of writing software and scripting into just simply asking an AI engine a question. So again, this is all in pursuit of automation, right? And reduced cost for operating these networks. And Open RAN is the foundation of building that.
Yeah, thanks very much, Paul. Well, let me ask a follow-up question because a couple of you have mentioned AI in your answers there. I'd like to ask, and Bernard, can I start with you? Will the use of Open RAN make it easier to leverage AI developments in software and hardware faster and earlier, perhaps, than with the more conventional RAN?
Well, the concept is certainly there, and using far edge AI capabilities, whether it's native on the server or as an add-on GPU, it's all going to depend on the cost-benefit business case, and it's in development right now, in my humble opinion. But having that flexibility is really, really good. So it really positions ORAN and vRAN super well for the future.
Thanks, Bernard. And Daniel, is this something you're supporting as well?
Yeah, I think what Bernard said is super important. And to go back to Paul's point about the impact of AI outside of the RAN site, that's obviously the first opportunity for the entire network to really optimize the service, whether it be cost or just quality of experience into the users. And I think a software-based implementation, of course, is going to be act on a lot of the intelligence and the actions that the operator wants to employ. At the cell site, I think we're super clear that these are sites. A lot of them are decades old. The reality is when deploying new functionality, whether it be 5G SA, whether it be AI, doesn't matter what it is, there's a real limited cost in terms of upfront cost, the power budget. It's just the market can't soak that. So that's where we're absolutely laser focused in delivering AI enabled functionality at the DU site with no extra cost. It's not that we're against something. It's what we're trying to do is live within the reality of a fixed power and cost budget, and that's how we develop our silicon roadmap and how we deliver our tools, and we do so in a very open way, right? It's super important. The way we're looking at AI is a way that whether it be, I guess, any software vendor out there, they build their IP and they can run on our silicon, they can run on Paul's CAS, they can run on the hardware deployed at the Telus network, or they can pick alternative of any of the same. And that's super, super important that we don't fall into the trap of getting a proprietary lock-in solution into the market. We want to avoid that at all costs.
No, thank you very much, Daniel. That's great. And Robert, this is something we've been certainly hearing a lot about this past 12 months and likely to hear about a lot more in the next 12 months. So what are your views? What are you seeing?
Yeah, look, I think it's clear AI is the fastest moving technology in our industry. And that's not to say it's brand new. Again, a lot of people are fully aware that we've been using machine learning and forms of AI within the network context for a decade or more. I think the big difference here is that AI needs fed with data, and Open RAN gives access to data in new ways that make it much more accessible. So we talked a bit about architectures, talked a bit about the potential to have autonomous agents, software agents taking action at different parts of the network. But that access to data that's what unlocks everything. That's what makes everything else possible. So any environment that you have nowadays, whether it's in telco or elsewhere, that gives you access to data, means you have a potential to do interesting things with it. Improve customer experience, by all means, reduce cost of ownership, energy, all these good things. But that I think is a kind of inevitable consequence here. So it's not so much about AI technology itself, but the combination of AI and the access to data. That means that Open RAN offers a very powerful architecture and a way to tap into that and do something useful with it, valuable.
Sure. Thank you very much, Robert. And Paul, do you want to wrap up our final program of this series? The final question of this program, the final program in the series, about whether or not Open RAN can enable AI developments faster and sooner, perhaps, than with traditional RAN?
Well, quite an honor. Thanks, Guy. Yeah, I think we're starting to see AI really emerge in two areas in Open RAN. One is in the RAN itself, where you see dynamic beamforming and power management. And this is really important because, as many of us know, 80% of the power spend in the OpEx budget for a service provider is at the radio, right? So the ability to leverage some of that new technology with machine learning and AI inference at these edge sites, to utilize the Intel technology to run that at the DU and manage those things, that's incredibly important to a service provider. And obviously, as a software-defined environment, and we have to remember, Open RAN and Virtual RAN creates a software-defined environment with well-defined APIs and interactions between the elements within the network and the application running on that edge site. So by definition, it's faster to develop AI in that environment. You can use modern practices like CI/CD and lifecycle management to dynamically change that software at a much higher pace and with less ancillary impact than you would have with legacy technologies. The other part of AI that's really been adopted, as we spoke about a moment ago, is really more towards the core of the network. It's about operations and ease of use for this environment. Look, this is a very complex technology stack. You've got multiple vendors providing the RAN workloads, the silicon, as we've been talking about, the virtualization layers with things like Kubernetes, and that's complex to manage. And AI is a next level of automation that enables a service provider to do that with lower cost staff and with less time to resolve incidents, and thus produce higher quality service for their customers. So both in the RAN and in the core, we really see the emergence of AI having a major impact here, and one in a software-defined world that makes it faster to iterate on the AI, as you were asking about, Guy.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Paul. We must leave it there for now. Thank you all for taking part in this final Vanguard discussion. If you enjoyed this program and want to know more, then please watch the full-length videos in our Open RAN Vanguard series. You can find them all on our website. Well, we promised you an exclusive report, and our friends at Appledore Research have produced a special Open RAN Vanguard report for you, and it will soon be available to download and read via our website. You just need to register your interest, and then you will have access to the report once it's published, as well as all of these associated videos. And that's all from Vanguard inside the Telus Open RAN transformation. We do hope you enjoyed the programs, and we extend our thanks to Telus, Wind River, Intel and Appledore. For now though, thank you for watching and goodbye.